At the end of the last scene that we discussed, that we read, Duncan has completed the murder of his king underneath his own castle battlements and has left after meeting back up with Lady Macbeth and having a discussion there about kind of how to hide the death and how they're supposed to act. And then there comes a knocking at the door. And it would be the door of the castle, the gate, whatever. And there was a porter who was a doorkeeper. And this is kind of a strange section. I've seen it portrayed different ways. One of the live enactments of the play Macbeth that I saw had the porter as kind of comic relief, where he would come on the stage and in the midst of, murdering the king and all of this heavy stuff. I remember one part of it was he would walk to the door to open it for whoever was knocking, and he had on long johns, and the seat of his long johns were down, and he actually mooned the audience. And of course, I was so offended and appalled that, it was live theater. In the version that I like to use in class, that's the Patrick Stewart version of Macbeth, that won a lot of Broadway awards and Tony Award nominated. The porter is really disgusting. He's a drunk. It's kind of comic, but it's really dark. So I guess that's now the way I'm going to explain it, since that's the version that you'll be watching to kind of catch up and get whatever you don't in the text. So the knocking continues after Macbeth has said, basically, I wish you could wake Duncan with your knocking. He's already regretting what he's done. He didn't want to do it. He wasn't going to do it. His mind got settled. He did it and immediately wished he hadn't. So it's like his weak moment was actually doing it. And every other instance, he was opposed to it. And again, that goes back to Lady Macbeth being his spur. The story continues. The knocking continues, but the porter does not immediately open the door. Instead, he plays a game with himself in which he imagines himself as the porter of hell and jokes about the kind of sinners he might let in. Eventually, however, he opens the door to Lennox and Macduff, who have been commanded to call upon the king to arrange the royal departure. In other words, they've come to take the king home. King Duncan came to Macbeth's castle and celebrated naming Macbeth the Thane of Cawdor in addition to the Thane of Glamis. And now he's going to be escorted back to his own castle. So Lennox and Macduff have come to call upon the king to arrange their royal departure. It is early morning, and most of those in the castle are still asleep. One who is not is Macbeth, and he directs Macduff to the king's chamber. Only a moment passes before the news breaks. King Duncan has been murdered. Macduff is very, very important later on. So it's somewhat significant that he finds the king when the king has first is discovered dead. So Macbeth is up because he didn't go to sleep. He killed the king, and they're pretending like they've been asleep so that nobody will suspect them. But Macbeth says, okay, he's in there, going in there and see him. And once again, the body is discovered off stage. On hearing the terrible revelation, the Macbeths' acts are beyond suspicion. They grieve. They're so upset. They act the part. But Macbeth admits to having killed the guards of the king's chamber, not part of the original plan, and Lady Macbeth faints. So it's a little bit confusing, to me at least. You have Macduff arrive at the castle. He's sent to the king's chambers and finds the king dead. He comes back to the main area where Macbeth is and where other people come in. Macbeth leaves and comes back, and in that leaving and coming back, he goes in and kills the guards. And what's the problem with that? Yes, you are correct. The guards were supposed to have been blamed for the death, but and that's not the part of the plan that Lady Macbeth came up with, and she came up with everything else. And why would she faint? there are two interpretations of this. One was she was trying to distract others from the fact that Macbeth just killed two guards. And one is that she's upset because he's messed with her plans. And again, she's painted him as so weak. Once again, he's messed up. The assembled thanes, the warriors of Scotland, resolved to avenge the act of treason. Remember, they've just fought a war and killed the traitors. And now there is another act of treason within Macbeth's castle, and it's led to the death of the king. Duncan's sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, thinking themselves open to the charge of murdering their father, plan to flee to England and Ireland. One goes to England, Malcolm goes to England, Donalbain goes to Ireland. And you might wonder why they're leaving and why would they be charged with the murder of their father. But if you go back, I hope I've mentioned this to you before, the law of primogeniture, where the oldest male inherits everything, and that was to maintain power. Otherwise, if you chopped up your land and ownings among all of your children, then eventually your power would wane and nobody would have very much after a few generations. So one of them, Malcolm, has been named the successor to Duncan, but that wouldn't be unusual because he's the older brother. And let's say something happens to Malcolm and he meets with an accident. Then it goes to Donalbain. So there are two thoughts here. One is that they left because they don't want to be blamed. Back then, sometimes family members did kill family members because of power. I mean, again, Macbeth has killed a kinsman and his king and the person he's sworn to protect and the person who's just honored him. So, that's why loyalty was so important, because disloyalty led to the overthrow of the system of the king. Another reason why you could say that Malcolm and Donalbain left the area is if Macbeth is to become king, he can't become king while they're there. So on the one hand, they're leaving so they're not blamed. On the other hand, Shakespeare has to get rid of them in order to continue on with Macbeth. And that's called, I think it's Latin, pronounced Deus ex machina. It's God in the machine, which means it's a little bit contrived. It's a little bit too convenient, but it has to be done for the play, the text, the story to continue the way it does. If this didn't happen, then Macbeth would never be made king, and that was part of the witch's prophecy to begin with. On his way from the castle, the Thane of Ross encounters an old man who confirms the widespread reports of disruption in the natural world. This is one sentence, and it's so important because with King James being fascinated with demonology and the world of witches and demons and such, in that time period, there was a natural world explanation for things that are scientific, lightning storms, thunder, that nature would be read as somehow a sign from God, and during polytheism from the gods, dating back to Greek and Roman and all mythologies actually that developed earlier, including Norse. So there's something wrong in the natural world, and it's exhibited in nature. And this happens in Julius Caesar also, where volcanoes erupt and all these weird things are going on. And it's supposed to show the disruption of the natural state, even within Macbeth's castle. It is simply not natural for a woman to want to kill and to talk about bashing her child's brains out. It is not natural for a thane who has been rewarded by his king to kill his king. So the outside world is representative of the inside world of the castle and the events of the play. Macduff appears with fresh news that Duncan is buried, that his sons have fled, and that the kingship has passed to Macbeth. The opening prophecies of the witches have been completed. Banquo suspects Macbeth, but gains comfort from the second part of the witch's prediction that his own children will be kings. Again, yes, he is suspicious because he's the only one who knows, other than Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, about the prophecies. But if it's just meant to be because it's what the witches said, then it will eventually benefit him because his children will be kings. And that makes sense because Macbeth has no children. So it's all kind of fitting in a loosely structured puzzle. Having announced his intention to go riding with Fleance, his son, Banquo is persuaded by the Macbeths to return later that evening to their new palace at Forres for a special feast. However, Macbeth realizes that the witch's prophecy regarding Banquo represents a threat to his own position. Unable to endure the thought of Banquo's descendants claiming his position, Macbeth summons 2 hired murderers and confirms with them prior arrangements for the killing of Macbeth. For the killing of Banquo and Fleance. So not only is he not hesitant to kill now, he's killing his best friend and a child. This is a major aspect and theme of this play, is to watch the changes of Lady Macbeth from beginning to end and the changes in Lord Macbeth from the beginning to end. He was a badass, then he was weak. But what does he become now that yet 2 more murders he is conducting? I'm going to stop there and pick up there with the next recording.